14 to 20. So I'm turning to Luke chapter 22. We'll pick it up in verse 14, and we'll read to verse 20. It states, "And when the hour was come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. And he said unto them, With desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say unto you, I will not any more eat thereof until it be fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took the cup and gave thanks, and said, Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I say unto you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God shall come. And he took bread and gave thanks and brake it, and gave it unto them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise also the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you." So what does the Bible have to say about this very meaningful event that took place between Jesus and his disciples, where he instituted the Lord's Supper? Well, there is no record in the New Testament of the Lord's Supper being celebrated with oil, cheese, milk, and honey, as was brought to our attention by the apostolic tradition. So these practices not being mentioned in the Bible, we as Seventh-day Adventists have not incorporated them into our service of the Lord's Supper. What about frequency? How often should the Lord's Supper be celebrated? Well, the only thing that the New Testament mentions is that which we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 26, where it states, "As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you do proclaim the Lord's death till he comes." No other instructions appear in the New Testament regarding how often we should celebrate this ordinance. Well, what kind of principles should guide us? Well, we have followed in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have followed the Anabaptists, Zwinglian tradition, in which we celebrate it quarterly. In this, we are not wanting to turn it into a sacramental experience such as what I laid out yesterday by celebrating it too frequently. This might increase the tendency of participating in what the Apostle Paul calls an unworthy manner, not discerning the Lord's body, not discerning the spiritual significance of the event, and regarding it as just a sacramental service where all of a sudden, without our contemplation, without our coming to grips with the conditions whereby we can appreciate this, we are just being infused somehow with the presence of God. And so we have guarded against that by spreading it out a little bit. Some may think that perhaps it is too much. In other words, the celebration of this in a quarterly manner may be too much time. So neither, of course, should it be infrequently celebrated, because we will lose the significance of what Jesus went through. The closing scenes of his ministry will be lost upon us. Thus far, we have chosen to celebrate it quarterly. And the aim and the motive is to preserve the spiritual intent of the ordinance. That's not to say this is a hard and fast rule, and at times I think we would do ourselves well to celebrate it according to certain circumstances, perhaps a little more frequently. What about the issue of alcohol versus grape juice? Interestingly enough, if we were to read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, what are referred to as the Synoptic Gospels, and 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23 and 26, we would find that the Synoptics and Paul use the word cup and the fruit of the vine. In every instance, the fruit of the vine is mentioned. Now, when you automatically squeeze grapes into a cup, that's not alcohol. Alcohol, in order for it to become alcohol, it has to go through a long process, the process of fermentation and putrefaction, in order for it to become alcohol, and it's not an easy process. And so when the gospel writers mention the fruit of the vine, it undoubtedly points to the pure juice of the grape which represents the sinlessness of Christ's life and the perfection of the sacrifice in which he had made. There's an interesting statement here. Commenting on this service in The Desire of Ages, page 653, it states, Christ is still at the table on which the Paschal Supper has been spread. The unleavened cakes used at the Passover season are before him. The Passover wine, untouched by fermentation, is on the table. These emblems Christ employs to represent his own unblemished sacrifice. Nothing corrupted by fermentation, the symbol of sin and death, could represent the Lamb without blemish and without spot. That's also 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 19. What about the use of the bread? Is it leavened or unleavened? In Exodus chapter 12, verse 15 and 19, the Jews removed all leaven from the home on the eve of the Passover. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 and 8, the Apostle Paul equates leaven with sin. It can be safely assumed that on that night when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper, that it was unleavened bread. Who may participate in this service? Does one need to be penitent,